So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today, and thanks for coming back to those of you who were here for last week's webinar. I'm glad I didn't scare you off or run you off or anything. For those of you who weren't here last week, I'm Dr. Allison Boyer, and I am director of the brand new Center for Teaching and Learning here at Collin College. And this is the second in a series of 3 webinars that I'm doing this month, focusing on online teaching specifically. It looks like everybody's got their mics muted, but I just want to give you a gentle reminder about that, since there's potential for us to have a pretty big group today. I think everybody can hear me now, so that's great. I am going to share my screen as well so that you can see the PowerPoint slides. Okay. Go back. Everybody can see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. There we go. So, moving online this spring, we had to do it in quite a hurry. And I think that brought with it quite a bit of a learning curve for a lot of us. And many of the things that we might do in the traditional classroom had to be translated into the online classroom, including our assessment strategies. So for today, I thought we would focus specifically on what assessment could look like when teaching online, and what the research tells us are some pedagogically sound strategies for assessment, specifically in the online environment, but also just in general. And I just want to give everybody a gentle reminder. Today, I'm focusing just on teaching strategies and methodologies, not teaching technology, how to. I'm not going to talk about the ins and outs of Canvas or Zoom or anything like that. Just focusing on teaching. We have the ELC. I know Frances Choi from the ELC is here today. They already do an amazing job of helping people with things like that. So I couldn't do a better job than that. So again, my focus is just going to be on the teaching. So I would really like to begin just by taking the pulse of the room, so to speak. So I want to start by asking you all to weigh in a little bit on what your primary considerations are when you are determining assessment methods for your class, whether it's online or face-to-face, but we're focusing specifically online today. What are some things that you really think about when you are deciding what your assignments or what your exams are going to be like in an online class? You can talk out loud. If you want to share in the chat, you can do that. Let's see here. Scaffolding, that's great. SLOs, excellent.
Yeah.
What assessment? Go ahead.
This is Jay. I usually make sure that my assessments are correlated to my class objective, course objectives.
Yes,
so.
Good. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And I see some other people saying that in the chat. What assessment measures are most in sync with what's being evaluated, scenario-based, whether my directions are clear enough for students to deliver what I'm seeking. All of those things are so important. It's helping students to learn. Yes, that's great. You guys are awesome. You're all thinking about all the right things. So the next question that I want to pose to you is then, What complicates your assessment methods when you are moving to an online environment? What are some things that make the assessment process feel more challenging or make you feel like you can't do what you really want to do? Oops. Oh, sorry, I'm having trouble seeing the chat right now.
Oh, secure testing environment.
Secure testing environment, yes. I was definitely expecting that to come up, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I know that that is tricky in online classrooms.
That's a really big deal for me because I teach math.
Yes.
And now there's so many different apps that students can just snap a picture of the equation, and I don't have any way to proctor. All I have is a lockdown browser.
Yeah.
And so for me, I know that students are passing the course without any accountability, and that's I have a real problem with that, since they have to they need that knowledge in order to move on to the next level of their math. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know the solution. I'm hoping to find a solution here today.
Okay, well, no pressure.
Lots of pressure.
Right, no.
Fix it for me.
No. I'll do my best to give you all some things to think about. How about that? So in the chat, I'm seeing some things about, definitely about honesty and students cheating, assessing a large amount of material, student involvement. Susan says, Jennifer is describing my situation exactly. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, that is the trickiest thing to consider. Maybe the most difficult complication when it comes to online assessment. And it sounds like there's a lot of agreement here when we talk about that. So one thing that I was really glad that you all brought up is the idea of learning goals. Obviously, when we're deciding on our assessment strategies, we certainly always want to keep those learning goals in mind and ensure that our chosen assessments are aligning with those goals. And it sounds like you guys are absolutely on the right page about that. And somebody else mentioned this in the chat as well. I think it's really essential to conceptualize assessment as an integral part of the learning process rather than just a series of hoops for our students to jump through so that we can assign them grades, right? Assessment doesn't have to be kind of an us versus them situation. In the end, we just want to make sure that our students are learning what we want them to learn, right? So that's going to kind of be my focus today. We're going to start with some considerations for exams and quizzes specifically, and then we'll talk about some alternative assessments in a little bit. So exams, and I think particularly multiple choice exams, are understandably a go-to assessment measure for a lot of us as instructors, especially when we need to assess a large number of students or there's really specific information that we're looking for. But as you all already mentioned, when we're teaching in an online environment, those fears about academic integrity really become magnified, right? By the opportunity for students to Google answers casually without detection potentially, to take pictures of things. Like Jennifer mentioned, it's a new age, and there are so many different ways for students to engage in academic dishonesty. I hesitate to even mention this, but go to YouTube and Google or look up ways to cheat, search for ways to cheat, and you will be shocked at the number of things that you find about that. It's a little bit scary, it's a little bit disheartening, but we also want to assume the best of our students sometimes when we can. So one response to this situation is obviously the use of proctoring services, proctoring software when we can, such as HonorLock, which is something that the college signed up for this spring, or there was the lockdown browser, right? However, and I think some of you may have already discovered this, while these kinds of services are really valuable, proctoring services for online exams can be also extremely expensive for colleges as well as students, and can also create a lot of undue anxiety for honest students, because we do have honest students, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. And furthermore, these aren't foolproof, right? They don't always work perfectly the way we want them to work. They bring with them kind of a new set of technological requirements and costs that can really outweigh some of the sometimes minor benefits at best. And I know I've seen some surveys. I know that there were some really mixed responses to the use of HonorLock this spring. So what I want to do for the next few minutes is think about some evidence-based strategies for implementing online exams and quizzes that can help bypass the need for proctoring services, bearing in mind that there is no perfect solution or panacea for this. So I cannot promise the perfect solution to your problem. I can just offer you some ideas to consider. So the first thing I want us to think about are timed open book tests. So the idea behind this is kind of leaning into the online testing environment and embracing students' capacity to access course materials and other resources. Open book tests obviously allow students to have a text and even online material available for reference. And this pretty much undermines the impact of cheating, right? And ultimately mirrors what typically happens in a real world situation. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't always have all the answers up here. I do a lot of research and I look up a lot of things. And it thereby can cultivate in students some authentic problem solving and decision making skills, critical thinking skills that can be useful beyond the classroom. Research has also shown that open book tests can enhance student motivation, satisfaction, and performance. So there's a lot of benefits to open book tests. So the first item in terms of suggestions for implementation that I have for you here are that questions obviously should be complex. They should require students to still know the material as well as where to look to find information or to find answers if they are uncertain about something. And research tells us that open book tests are typically more difficult than regular in-class exams because of this. The questions are a little bit more complex, a little more higher order thinking required for them. So by that same token, you should be designing questions that go beyond simple recall and repetition if possible. They should require analytical and application skills to answer them, because they are going to have this ability to kind of do a little bit of research and look up some information. What can help that is also to design questions that draw specifically on class notes and content rather than kind of broad questions that might pop up really quickly in a quick Google search or in a Wikipedia article, right? So these should be things that maybe you've fleshed out in class, things that they've discussed, or really that you've delved into beyond some of those kind of broad topics. At least a good portion of them should. Some other considerations would be giving them a timed window for completion. Maybe you're already doing this, so maybe 60 minutes to 90 minutes, whatever feels reasonable to you for them to complete the given test. And that timed window for completion can help ensure that ill-prepared students will not be able to just blindly search the texts for the right answers, right? Well-designed open book tests will likely confound students who haven't been doing the work all along. They should already have some sort of sense of understanding about this. So similarly, you also want to have a timed window of test availability, maybe 24 hours or something like that, when students will be able to access the test or quiz. This can also complicate the ability of students to share or collude in real time, if that's a concern for you. And I know this isn't always possible, but if you can, it can be beneficial to encourage your students to use a hardwired internet connection to reduce incidences of lost work that might occur with unreliable Wi-Fi connections. And again, I know that this may not be possible for all students, but if you can encourage that, it can be really helpful. But then I also, kind of the flip side of that is I encourage you to have a backup plan for what to do if something happens and a student claims that they lost connection, and encourage your students to have a backup plan as well. And then finally, be transparent with your students. Explain to them and perhaps encourage them that you know that they're going to look up things online. Remind them that the questions will be challenging, so that they're still going to have to prepare in advance, and that keeping up with course material is still really required for success in the class. Students also generally tend to really like open book tests because they feel a little bit less anxious about it. They have some reduced anxiety. And telling them that, look, I know you're going to look things up, and that's okay. But remember, you still have to be familiar with the material. You still have to be well informed, and you still have to study and be prepared, can be helpful. Again, it's not a perfect solution, but I think it's a good one. Just kind of lean into it. And I do want to add that I have a lot of resources available on the website for the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I'll show you the link for that again. But it's just the Teaching and Learning link under Inside Collin. It is behind Cougar Web, so you're going to have to log in with your Collin credentials. But on that website, I have a lot of resources in general about teaching, but some specifically about assessment and about exam design. About essay exams, about multiple choice exams. So I encourage you to go check those out if you want some more information about designing some of these things. And I see some great comments in the chat right now about having a backup plan, giving a 2-day window for an exam. Flexibility, Rosemary is saying, be flexible. Absolutely. I think if we take anything away from teaching, our experiences with teaching online this semester, is that flexibility is really crucial. Susan says memorization of anatomy and medical terms is a learning goal, and that's okay. That is absolutely going to be true for a lot of people, and that makes perfect sense given what I know you teach, Susan. So that's okay. Like I said, these might not be the perfect solution for everybody. So it might be that you take away a few ideas from our session today, but maybe some will work, maybe not all of them will work. So again, just food for thought. Your students utilize the time flexibility to collaborate. Shoot. Well, we'll keep thinking about that. Okay. So the next thing I want to consider is a series of shorter exams or quizzes or unit tests in place of 1 or 2 comprehensive major exams. I mean, I know when I was in college 100 years ago, I had a lot of classes where I had just 2 exams, a midterm and a final, and that was it. And that's what my whole grade was based on. So they were really high stakes for us in the class. But more frequent assessment has been shown to improve learning and retention, i.e. the testing effect. Are you all familiar? Has anybody heard of the testing effect? Or you know what that is? Basically,
You learn from the mistakes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the testing effects is basically the phenomenon by which our long-term memory is increased when we practice retrieval. So instead of just studying, reading over material over and over and over, when we're tested on that material, whether we test ourselves or someone else tests us, we actually get deeper learning of that material, and our long-term memory of the material is better. So it's really interesting to think about. So if we give our students more frequent assessments, whether it's bigger tests or a lot of quizzes, we can kind of leverage that testing effect with our students. It also has been shown to foster better organization of knowledge, better study habits, because our students are studying more frequently throughout the semester, right? Rather than just cramming the night before a big exam, which we all know they do that. I bet we all did it too. I know I did, even though I probably knew better. It also has the benefit for us as teachers by providing us and also our students with more frequent feedback about how they're doing, about their learning, and then that can allow us as teachers to adjust what we're doing in the classroom accordingly. And as I already mentioned, more frequent quizzes and exams also creates lower stakes for students, since their entire course grade doesn't hinge on just 1 or 2 exams, thus alleviating anxiety for them, and hopefully some of the pressure to cheat. You know, a lot of the inclination to engage in academic dishonesty comes from anxiety on our students' behalf. They're worried about how they're going to do, and they feel like that's the only way to do well. So you can leverage that testing effect as well as the spacing effect when you're giving them more frequent assessments. So the spacing effect, similar to the testing effect, is the phenomenon by which we're better able to recall information and concepts if we learn them in multiple spread out sessions. So again, rather than just cramming all the information in and spitting it out once, if we're asked to repeat that information multiple times, again, we're probably going to learn it better. So if you, in each assessment, maybe include 1 or 2 or a few questions from previous units, you're continuously assessing how they learned that information, reminding them that they still have to know it. I see Kelly Martin in the chat has mentioned the forgetting curve. Absolutely. So if you're continually assessing them, they're going to learn it better. So we can leverage the testing effect as well as the spacing effect when we are using a series of shorter exams. So a few other things to keep in mind here. You have to be careful to avoid assessment fatigue in your students. So even as I'm sitting here suggesting that you consider a series of exams rather than a few exams, I also want to say you need to balance that. You want to tread that line carefully. You do not need to quiz them every single day or even every week. If you don't want to, definitely not every day. I'm going to just flat out say that. Maybe don't give them a quiz every day. Instead, maybe you aim for quizzes every module, or maybe 4 or 5 exams over the course of a semester that might cover 2 chapters or major units apiece. You can think about what might work best for you. But again, you want to avoid assessment fatigue with your students if you can. And I know that more frequent testing means more frequent grading. I am aware of this. But I know that there are some auto grading features in Canvas that you can probably take advantage of that might help alleviate that. Shorter quizzes and tests might likewise ease the grading process. Does anybody have any experience with some of those auto grading features? in Canvas that they might share, or others that I perhaps am unaware about?
Oh, when you set up a quiz, you have it set up with the right answer and it grades it automatically. So, but if it's short answer, then you're going to have to go in, because if it's not exactly how you wrote it, then it takes off. And so, but still, even then, it's, if you set up most of it multiple choice, and it doesn't take long.
Yeah, good. So there are some tools out there that can be helpful for you. So when you can take advantage of those, go for it. And hopefully, like I said, if they're shorter quizzes or exams, hopefully it'll be a little bit easier as well.
This past year, I was, or in this past semester, I would give a short quiz that was due each Sunday, but they could take it 3 times. So kind of a quizzing until mastery, and they could see what they got wrong and then relearn it.
Yes. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Sorry, what class is that?
That was pathophysiology, and I'll be doing it also in medical terminology. Most of it's memorization and recall, but in pathophysiology, there's a little more synthesis.
That's great. Thank you, Susan. And I love that suggestion, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So thank you for that. Before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about shuffled sequences and multiple versions of your exams. Specifically, multiple but equitable versions of exams. So the benefits of doing this can hopefully complicate students' attempts to collaborate in real time by sharing quick answers. You know, again, not a perfect solution, but it can be really helpful. So for instance, for courses maybe that require calculations, you might change the numbers that need to be utilized among various versions of the test, though it's the same skill that's required to complete the question. You might change the order of answers amongst various versions of a test if it's a multiple choice test, for instance. If you're utilizing randomized questions to create multiple versions of an exam, be mindful that selected questions are demonstrating equivalent levels of difficulty and drawing on equivalent skills. So you want to make sure that one test is not inherently more difficult than the other version of a test, obviously, for reasons of fairness. You want this to be an equitable process for all students, regardless of what version they get. And in general, it's just good practice to vary and modify your exam questions from semester to semester. This helps diminish the value of what might be shared test files that some students might keep and access later. I know that it can be a pain in the you-know-what to have to rewrite a test every semester. Writing tests are hard, but it's good practice, not only for you, but also for your students. And quite frankly, studying old exams in and of itself is not necessarily a practice that's lacking in academic integrity. In fact, it can be a really great way to study. Remember, we talked about the testing effect, right? So that could even be a study tool that you're able to provide to your students at some point. And if the prospect of having to develop a large number of exam items feels overwhelming to you, and I totally understand if it does, it would feel that way to me as well, look to your students for help with question creation. This can be a great way to get them thinking about the material in different ways. It can give you an opportunity to give them a participation or completion grade. In some way, you can task them with developing some potential exam questions for consideration. With some guidance from you, of course, you can model that for them, but then that gives you a whole bank of questions. Students can get really excited if they see the question that they wrote actually showing up on one of the exams. So it's kind of a win-win situation for them. Could be an extra credit assignment as well. There are a lot of different ways that you could do that. So, allowing multiple attempts. So Susan brought this up earlier, and I'm so glad because this is a great practice. Allowing students multiple attempts at a quiz has been shown to reduce test anxiety, something that I've already mentioned, as well as the desire to collude, because they know that they can retake it. It can also really build a lot of goodwill with your students, as well as offering this great opportunity to engage in recursive learning and improve their understanding. So again, we're getting back to that idea of the testing effect that I mentioned earlier. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. You can choose to limit the number of attempts that they're able to make at a quiz or an exam, or not. You might say you have up to 3 opportunities to retake this exam, but I also know some instructors who say, keep taking it as many times as you want until you get the grade that you want on it. The choice is yours. Similarly, you can choose to record their most recent score on their most recent attempt at the quiz, or you can choose to record the highest score. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's whatever feels more meaningful to you, whatever you think is going to help your students learn better. A particularly good strategy, if possible, is for each iteration of the assessment, include different questions over the same material. Again, if possible, because I know that means developing different questions, but this can help cultivate and measure learning of the material rather than just memorization of the specific questions. And again, it depends on how high stakes or low stakes each quiz is, whether you want to do something like that. If it's a really low stakes quiz, it might not matter if you have new questions each time, but if it's a little bit more important, then maybe you do. But there are a lot of different ways that you can attempt this, and I think it's a really interesting thing to consider. Are we doing okay so far? Any questions anybody wants to bring up while I'm paused before I move on? Okay, I see thumbs up. Okay, good deal. And I am still having trouble seeing the chat sometimes, so I'm gonna apologize if I miss something in the chat. If you ask a question that you really want an answer to, please feel free to interrupt me and just ask your question out loud, okay? So now I wanna shift. We've talked about some exam strategies. I wanna shift a little bit and think about some alternatives, not only to quizzes and exams, but to things like traditional term papers that we might often give our students. And so some of the things that I'm going to talk about now or ask you to think about are things that you don't necessarily only have to do or can only do in the online environment. These are things that you can do in the face-to-face classroom as well, but sometimes it takes a little bit of creativity to think about assessment for the online environment as well. So I'm going to start with a few kind of pedagogical principles when we're thinking about assessment, and then we'll have some examples and just some ideas and an opportunity to brainstorm and share a little bit. So one pedagogical principle to keep in mind is that employing multiple measures or employing diverse assessment methods is just it's a great rule to follow. It can provide more accurate, more valid, more well-rounded assessment by giving your students a lot of different opportunities to really demonstrate their learning rather than only one way. So in other words, instead of asking students to complete a battery of tests that are all kind of the same over the course material, you might consider weaving in some additional assessment modalities for them. formative assessments as well as summative assessments to allow students to demonstrate what and how they learn in a variety of ways. Because, you know, some students are probably really good at taking tests, while others are learning the material but maybe aren't as good at taking tests, and they can demonstrate their learning in different ways, right? And again, I have some additional resources on the CTL website about these things, about assessments. So you can dig in there a little bit if you want to keep thinking about that. I saw somebody mention this in the chat earlier as well, including formative assessment. I've mentioned this a couple of times. I think it's important in face-to-face classes. I think it is especially important in the online class because it can be really challenging to read our students in online classes. I know we talked a little bit about this in the last webinar. You know, we don't have that face-to-face interaction with our students. Even if you're in a Zoom meeting like this, you can't see all of their faces at the same time. You can't get those kind of nonverbal cues about whether they're understanding, you know, looks of confusion or nodding along with you. So formative assessments or other opportunities to kind of check in on your students' progress in really low stakes ways can be especially helpful when you're teaching online. These could be graded or ungraded quizzes that you give them. They could be things like quick exit tickets that they submit online somehow or in the chat of a meeting or using an online platform like Microsoft Forms or Padlet, which we're going to look at in a minute and I'll talk a little bit more about. This can kind of help your students avoid going in the wrong direction. You can kind of step in before it's too late and reset their path, so to speak, and make sure that, and you can adjust your teaching accordingly, right? If all of your students are kind of falling behind on a certain concept, then you know that maybe you need to spend a little bit more time on that in the course. There are a lot of different ways that you can do this. I've also recently learned about something called Pear Deck, P-E-A-R, deck, 2 words, which is a Google extension, an add-on for Google Slides. And yes, I know we're a Microsoft campus, but this is really cool, so I kind of wanted to tell you about it. You can present using Google Slides with this Pear Deck extension, and this allows you to interact with your students online. You can ask them questions. They can respond to those questions anonymously. You can see who's responding, but you can also share their responses anonymously with the whole class. You know, can work kind of like clickers or student response systems. I put a link to this in the Padlet that I sent you all a link to before the webinar. And again, we'll look at it later. Caveat, I haven't used it before, but I have a colleague at another institution who has used it and thinks it's pretty cool. So I thought I'd tell you all about that. So formative assessment. It can also be really helpful to incorporate authentic assessment. Authentic assessment are those measures that essentially ask students to perform what you might consider real-world tasks that demonstrate meaningful application of what they learned to a new situation. So authentic assessments are those that require students to engage in complex, even messy situations. They have to demonstrate judgment and evaluation of what skills are necessary to complete that task. Some research says that authentic assessments are likely to be more valid measurements, particularly of higher order skills, as well as, quite frankly, more interesting, maybe more meaningful and relevant to students because it can help them see the way what they're doing in class translates to real world tasks. So it doesn't feel like busy work to them. It feels like something that they might have to reasonably do at some point in the future. Better yet, back to that point about academic dishonesty, research shows that students cheat more on tests and exams than when they're tasked with authentic assessments. If you want more information on authentic assessments, there's this great resource called the Authentic Assessment Toolbox I have a link to that on the CTL website, but it has a lot of great information in there and examples. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. Obviously, you can incorporate authentic assessment practices in face-to-face classes as well. But I think it can be especially helpful to think about all of the options that are available to us in the online environment to kind of help us think outside the box a little bit, so to speak. All right, rubrics. Those of you who were here last week know that I love a rubric. I'm going to talk about them again here, so I'm sorry. I'm passionate about them, so I'm going to keep talking about them. When employing non-exam assignments, like those that we talked about earlier, the inclusion of a clear evaluation rubric that delineates the criteria for student success and is provided to students well in advance of their assignment completion is strongly recommended. The upshot is that rubrics can increase transparency and clarity about assignments for your students. They can improve learning and performance. They even provide you with more consistent and efficient grading process. When I first started using rubrics way back in the day, it was really to help me become faster at grading because I was teaching writing courses and it was taking me forever to grade because I would get stuck in the weeds. I see a lot of shades of gray, but using rubrics really helped keep me focused, and I was able to grade things a little bit more quickly. So again, it's kind of a win-win situation. I could spend an hour talking about rubrics. We don't have that kind of time today. Again, I have a lot of resources for you on the CTL website, and I am planning on putting together a session specifically focusing on rubric design and use for the fall. So keep an eye out for that. But I'm just going to take every opportunity I can to encourage you to use rubrics because I love them.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Can you hear me? This is Shiva.
Yes, absolutely.
Good morning. I am using rubrics. I have been using rubrics for ages.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I use it, I say that specifically in my syllabus, that the rubric is the guide on how to do the assignment, plus it's a feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you got 85, you see that you have lost 15 points in, I don't know, one of the rows of the rubric.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a good way of basically giving them some feedback, or do I have to go on and write down in the comment box? Because some of them, to be honest with you, they don't get the understanding. I mean, they don't have the understanding that this is where they went wrong. And I get quite a few emails that, could you explain to me that why I lost 15 points? And I send them back to the rubric. How can I communicate with them that the rubric is the how-to plus your feedback? Thank you.
Sure. I think, yes, rubrics are absolutely a great way to provide feedback for students because they're kind of outlining the criteria specifically for them. But I will also add that it's still beneficial, and I think maybe what you're finding is that students still probably need a little bit of individualized feedback at the very least to help them understand specifically where they went wrong in a given assignment. So while rubrics can kind of outline some of those broad strokes of criteria, it can be helpful to point them in more individualized feedback to where they could use improvement. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to write pages and pages of individualized feedback for your students. In fact, again, a rubric helps me avoid doing that because I have an inclination to want to do that. But if you can just even put a sentence or two in the little comment box that you might use with a rubric, I think that can be helpful for them. So I think my response to you is kind of a yes, absolutely, but you probably still want to do a little bit of that because, you know, think about it. We know what we mean when we're putting a rubric together, and hopefully we're making it really easy to understand and transparent for our students. But sometimes they probably are still going to need a little bit of help interpreting that rubric and interpreting the assignment. Does that help?
Yes, ma'am. Very good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. It was a good question. So, with the next few minutes that we have, I just want to share basically just a few different kinds of ideas for the different kinds of more non-traditional assessments that you might be able to use. And then we'll have an opportunity to kind of share with each other as well some of the cool things that I know you guys are doing in the classroom. So first, there are a lot of different performance-based assessments that you can consider. And I know that those of you who are probably teaching things like speech or communication are probably going to want to lean heavily on these kinds of things. So it could be individual student or group presentations. These could be live or they could be recorded, depending on what your preference is or what your students' access to technology is for the class. It could be student debates that they use via online meeting platforms. It could be something cool like a recorded podcast that they do, interviews, recorded or live, recorded illustrations or demonstrations that you might ask your students to do. There are a lot of really cool online tools that you can share with your students for doing things. I have a few listed here. Flipgrid, I also put a link to this in the Padlet. It's basically a social learning platform that allows you to ask a question and then students can pose a response using a video that they post to this Flipgrid. They can also respond to one another on the platform, kind of creating a web of discussion with each other. Powtoon seems like a pretty cool application you can use. It creates animations for you. So you could ask students to create an animation, or you could use it to help you explain something. Doesn't just have to be for assessment. Bunsy is a tool for creating interactive multimedia presentations. The user can integrate content from both external and internal sources. They can also create content directly on each slide. Edpuzzle is another teaching tool used to place interactive content into pre-existing videos from a variety of sources like TED Talks or YouTube. A video that you've made, could be something interesting. You ask students to create a video, or you give them a video that they have to create responses to or interact with. Just some really neat tools that I thought you might be interested in. Excuse me. I'm also, just FYI, working on another resource that has a whole list of other kind of free online tools for a variety of needs in the online classroom that I'm going to post to the CTL website pretty soon. I'm almost done with it, so hopefully by the end of the week I'll be able to upload that for all of you, and it'll include links to all of these things. So next, obviously exams and essays and traditional term papers can require problem solving and critical thinking and analysis. I'm not saying that. But there are a lot of other options that you can think about or utilize that can include these skills or require these skills from your students, but also tap into more varied student abilities and interests. So that, again, that idea of multiple measures that we mentioned. So just a few ideas here. They could analyze and respond to a case study. It could be individual or in groups. They could create charts or graphs or diagrams, provide an explanation, provide an analysis of an image or advertisement or a website. This is an assignment I love. Creating a business plan, review a book or a play or performance. They could easily watch something, watch a video that already exists even of a performance or something like that on YouTube. You could have them craft a policy memo or an executive summary about something, create a concept map. There are some really neat online tools that I think help facilitate kind of digital concept mapping as well. Their names are eluding me right now, but they're going to be on this resource that I put online. again, diagram, create an infographic. They could design an experiment if you're teaching in the sciences. They could engage in peer reviews with each other. This is another thing that I really love to do with my students, with one caveat. You still have to provide guidance to them about what you want the reviews to look like. You might want to model for them as well what a good peer review looks like, giving them good guiding questions. But there's a lot of research out there that supports this idea of peer review and peer instruction as being really beneficial for student learning. It can help level up students who are behind, assist them in critical thinking skills about their own work as well, because if they can look at somebody else's work and think critically about it, hopefully they can apply those same skills to their own work as well. All right. Next, writing-based assessments that aren't formal essays. There's nothing wrong with formal essays, but there are a lot of other things that you can do if you still want to get them writing. And it might be that you still want to assess their writing abilities, but with an assignment that maybe won't be as time or labor intensive to grade. Those of you who've graded papers know exactly what I'm talking about. So just a few ideas here. An annotated bibliography or a lit review. Maybe you ask them to write a letter to the editor of a publication or to a Congress member. Again, this idea of an executive summary or brief response or reflection papers. These are something that I really love to do as well. Maybe write a research proposal that's addressed to a real life grant agency, maybe a newspaper article or editorial, scientific abstract, even something like having them create their own PowerPoint or Prezi slides or some other kind of slideware can ask them to call on some of those analysis and writing skills, or contribute to a class or a group wiki or a collaborative document as a whole. I think can be really interesting. I have a colleague who's done that with some of her music classes where she had them all create kind of one report together. She also had them do something really cool. I think one of their assignments was to write liner notes for specific musical pieces, which I thought was really creative and interesting. And I think our students really enjoyed it. So just a few ideas there. Finally, maybe you want to give your students assignments that gives them the opportunity to kind of flex their creative skills a little bit, but still giving you the opportunity to assess other important skills. These can just be really fun for students and fun for you, gives you a lot of variety when you're grading. So it could be something like a brochure or advertisement, a podcast. Maybe they have to develop a product or write up a proposal for a product. You could even have external judges who judge their products and choose the best proposal, or you could have the classmates vote on what they think is the best one. Maybe they have to design an infographic or illustration. I know there's at least one really useful online free tool for creating infographics that you can share with your students. Again, the name of it is eluding me right now. Maybe you have them write a journal for a real or fictional character. If you're teaching an English class or something like that, could be something like having them rewrite a narrative from a different perspective. Maybe they have to write a letter explaining a problem or a concept to a beginner. Right? So asking them to share their knowledge with somebody who's a novice. Things like poems or plays or dialogues, creating web pages, blogs, videos, a photo essay. There's a lot of great portfolio kind of software that you can use. Maybe they create a portfolio of art, music, architectural plans, whatever. Obviously, there's a lot of great ideas out there. And again, I put a few, I used Padlet to share with you guys just so you could kind of see one of them in action. So with the little bit of time that we have left, I was hoping that you all might share some of your creative or out-of-the-box assignments that you have used in your own online classroom, or some that you're thinking about trying. So it could be that you post an idea or share an idea and get some feedback on it. Well, we can kind of brainstorm together about it, maybe get some ideas from one another, or just share with each other, because I don't know if you all know this, but one of the best strategies for being a good teacher, I think, is being able to steal good ideas from other good teachers. So I thought we might have an ability to do that today, an opportunity to do that. So in the email that I sent all of you before the webinar, I sent a link to a Padlet, which is kind of an online platform where you can post things, kind of like a bulletin board in that sense, that you can create for free. So I was hoping we might use that to share some ideas here. I want to open it here as well. So, oh great, some people are already posting some things. So let's maybe take a minute. If you want to take a minute to post something here, it doesn't have to be a link to something. It could just be an idea that you type in. Like I did this really cool thing with speeches for my class. Or it could be anything. You can post a video, you can post an image. I just kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to try this out, if you don't mind. So somebody posted about Top Hat remote proctoring. So let's give that a shot, if you don't mind. And if you want to share something, talk about something and share it with the group that way, that's great too. Writing from a character's point of view, I love that. And I'll add that I'm gonna leave this open for at least a little while. So you all can keep posting to it after this webinar is over. You can keep accessing it and read everybody else's ideas and share them with one another, so that it can be kind of a repository for all of us to share some really cool assessment ideas with one another. Limiting topics for argumentative research paper, yes. Presentations for the class, that's great. Yeah, and you can see that you can like each other's posts here. You can comment on each other's posts. There are also ways that you can reorganize this. I think I have it just organized so that the newest ones are kind of populating from the top down, but there are a lot of different ways that you can kind of mess with the organization on Padlet. Medical terminology or anatomy poster, that's great. Hopefully you guys figured out that you can also use this or access this via phone or tablet. I put a QR code on the screen for you. I can put that back up if you'd like. And that's another way to kind of make it easily accessible to your students if they want to use a phone or tablet. Or they can just type in the URL as well, because they're not super long, but sometimes just a link to click on or a QR code to scan can be easier. Let's see what else is happening. Canvas Studio. Creating a map or timeline, organizational chart, quick audio, video comment. That's great. I love it. Jeopardy review. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And so I hope that you will keep adding to this Padlet, keep referring back to it, reading all of the great things that your colleagues are sharing. I think, again, there's so many great ideas that we can get from one another that can help kind of stir up our creative juices a little bit and give us some different ways that we can assess our students' learning. So it looks like we are officially out of time. So I just want to show you this last slide. I want to thank you all so much for being here today. We have one more webinar left in the series. So on the 23rd of July, we're going to focus on fostering student engagement in online courses, because I know that that can be really difficult as well, and we have to be creative with that sometimes. This one is going to be a faculty panel discussion with some wonderful faculty members. Pam Gator from sociology, Megan Cardwell-Wilson from dance, Minnie Bailey from humanities, and Deborah Cardenas from biology. So a lot of great variety as well. It'll be Thursday, July 23rd from 10:30 to 11:30. If you have not already registered for it and would like to attend, if you wouldn't mind going back to that same link and registering for that as well. That just helps me know how many people are going to be there so that I can send the link and send out the materials that might be required. And as I've said a few times already, I hope that you will take this opportunity to visit the website of the Center for Teaching and Learning. The link is right here. Again, I just want to remind you, this is behind Cougar Web on Inside Collins, so you're going to have to make sure you've entered your Collins credentials to access it. But I have one link that's teaching resources, another one that's devoted specifically to best practices for online teaching. And on that link, I also have a link to the recording of last week's webinar that was an overview of best practices in general for online teaching. If you want to view it and weren't here last week, you can do it there. The slides are there as well. You're also welcome to email me directly at aboye@collin.edu. I'm so happy to visit with you individually, or if you just want to shoot me an email with an idea or something, I always welcome that, especially since I am new here to the Collins College campus and I'm still getting to know everybody. So I hope that you will do that as well. And then finally, I absolutely want to give a shout out again to the ELC. They have some amazing resources as well about all kinds of things on their website. And I know that you guys already know how incredible they are, but I've got to give them a shout out here. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. And I hope that I will see some of you next week. And please don't hesitate to send me any questions, or if you want to ask a question here today, if you want to stick around for a minute, I can do my best to help you out. Again, I can't promise that I have all the answers, but I will. I'm always happy to help you think through things and give you some ideas. So thanks everybody for being here today. I hope you got some food for thought and just some things to think about as you work towards planning your next online class. Thanks everyone.